Just after 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, a message appeared on Donald Trump's Truth Social platform that stopped analysts, diplomats, and intelligence officials cold. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, the President of the United States wrote in a post that would ricochet through every foreign ministry, war room, and newsroom on earth. He added that he didn't want that to happen, but it probably will. In the long and often volcanic history of American presidential rhetoric, few sentences have carried such open menace, directed not at a military target, not at a regime apparatus, but at a civilization itself. The words were not the product of a speechwriter. They were not carefully calibrated for diplomatic consumption. They were a countdown. To understand how the world arrived at this moment on a sitting American president threatening the annihilation of an ancient nation's infrastructure by nightfall, you have to go back nearly 4 decades and then trace a series of events in the preceding 6 weeks that have reshaped the geopolitics of the Middle East more violently and more rapidly than anything since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Iran's story, in the modern geopolitical sense, begins with the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah and established a theocratic republic built on a foundational hostility toward the United States and Israel. For 47 years, that hostility was not merely rhetorical. Iran funded Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed Hamas in Gaza, backed the Houthi movement in Yemen, and supported Shia militias across Iraq and Syria. It pursued a nuclear program that successive American and Israeli administrations regarded as an existential threat. And at the center of it all, from 1989 until February 28, 2026, sat one man, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, a cleric who wielded absolute authority over Iran's military, judiciary, foreign policy, and nuclear ambitions with an iron hand that survived protests, sanctions, assassinations of his key generals, and 2 rounds of direct Israeli military strikes. The first of those rounds came in June 2025, what analysts now call the 12-day war, a concentrated Israeli air campaign that struck Iranian nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, and killed several senior commanders. Iran responded with hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones. A ceasefire was brokered. The world exhaled. But the fundamental confrontation had not been resolved. It had merely been deferred. Khamenei survived. The nuclear program persisted. And in January 2026, Iran's security forces massacred thousands of protesters in what became the bloodiest internal crackdown since the revolution itself, a crackdown that, according to analysts at Brookings, represented a regime so threatened from within that it was willing to absorb enormous international condemnation to preserve its grip on power. That January crackdown became the political ignition point for what came next. Donald Trump, already presiding over the largest American military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, responded to the massacre with public threats of military action. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, mediated by Oman, were quietly producing movement. The Omani foreign minister described significant progress, with Iran willing to make concessions, but Trump told reporters he was not thrilled with the talks. And on February 11, 2026, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flew to the White House. What they discussed in that meeting has since been documented in granular detail. Netanyahu presented Trump with fresh intelligence about Iran's military capabilities. The conclusion they reached together was that diplomacy had been exhausted, that a nuclear-armed Iran posed an unacceptable threat, and that the window to act was open. On Friday afternoon, February 27, 2026, at precisely 3:38 p.m. Eastern Time, Trump gave the order. The message was brief. Operation Epic Fury is approved. No aborts. Good luck. Israel's parallel operation was designated Roaring Lion. Within hours, the skies over Tehran were illuminated by strikes unlike anything the city had seen in living memory. The CIA, using hacked traffic cameras in Tehran and months of tracked intelligence on Khamenei's movements, had pinpointed a high-level security meeting inside his compound, a gathering of Iran's most senior military and intelligence officials. The strike coordinates were the product of visual intelligence, human intelligence, signals intelligence, and intercepted communications, all processed by powerful analytical systems into a 14-digit grid reference. That coordinate became the address of history. By early Sunday morning, March 1st, 2026, Iran's state broadcaster confirmed what the world already suspected. The supreme leader of Iran has reached martyrdom. Ali Khamenei, Iran's absolute ruler for 37 years, the man who had outlasted 8 American presidents, 4 Israeli prime ministers, and 3 decades of sanctions, was dead, killed in a daylight strike on his own compound. With him died his daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, and daughter-in-law, as well as Iran's defense minister, the IRGC commander, the defense council secretary, and at least 7 of the country's most senior security officials. It was, by any historical measure, the most consequential decapitation strike since the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and it happened not in an alleyway, but from the sky in broad daylight, with American intelligence enabling every detail. The reaction inside Iran was a portrait of a deeply divided society. In parts of Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Karaj, celebrations broke out in the streets. In Deloran, crowds filmed themselves toppling a statue of Khamenei. Security forces opened fire on celebrants. Simultaneously, pro-regime crowds mourned in Tehran's squares. The regime had not collapsed. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps remained intact and in command. Within 8 days, the Assembly of Experts appointed Mojtaba Khamenei, the late Supreme Leader's 56-year-old son, as his successor, and Iran's top political and military leadership pledged allegiance. The theocracy had absorbed its most devastating blow and, for the moment, held together, but it did so by deploying its most powerful remaining leverage, the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow waterway, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, sitting between the southern coast of Iran and the coast of Oman, is the single most critical choke point in the global energy system. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and natural gas passes through it. When Iran closed it to most commercial shipping in the immediate aftermath of the strikes, the effect on global markets was instantaneous and historic. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, described the resulting crisis as more severe than the oil shocks of 1973, 1979, and 2002 combined. The International Monetary Fund warned that every 10% increase in energy prices over the course of 2026 would drive global inflation up by nearly 0.5%. Developing nations, whose populations had no cushion against energy price spikes, food price increases, or currency devaluation, faced the steepest human cost. For Trump, the closure of the strait was both a strategic problem and a political one. He had declared that the United States had won the war. He had boasted that Iran's military had been obliterated. And yet the Strait of Hormuz remained closed, oil prices were soaring, and Iran was extracting leverage from its geographic position even as its cities absorbed strikes. It was, as analysts noted, Iran's survival strategy: impose high economic costs on the United States, its allies, and the global economy until the price of continuing became too high to bear. Trump responded by extending deadlines for Iran to reopen the strait, then threatening escalation. In a post on Easter Sunday, he demanded that Tehran open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. By Monday, April 6th, he was telling reporters that the United States had a plan where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. And then came Tuesday morning, the post that opened this story. By the time Trump's words appeared online, U.S. forces had already struck Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal, overnight. Israeli forces had attacked Iranian railways and bridges. Prime Minister Netanyahu acknowledged the railway strikes publicly, insisting they were directed at infrastructure used by the IRGC, not the Iranian people. The Israel Defense Forces issued a Farsi language warning telling Iranians to avoid trains for 12 hours. At least 18 civilians, including 2 children, were killed in a single Iranian province. A residential area in Tehran was hit. A railway bridge and train station were destroyed in Kazan. In Iran's Alborz province, families were pulling bodies from rubble. Iran's response was defiance dressed in the language of civilization itself. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Bakai posted on the platform X with the hashtag Iran will win, writing that the power of a civilized nation's faith in its cause would prevail over the logic of brute force, a direct inversion of Trump's threat, capitalizing the word civilized as a pointed rebuttal. The IRGC's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters warned that retaliatory responses would be far more forceful and on a much wider scale. More ominously, the IRGC's cyber warfare unit announced it was dropping all self-restraint and would act to deprive the United States and its allies for years of the region's oil and gas. Iran also fired missiles at targets in central Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, forcing the closure of the King Fahd Causeway between those 2 Gulf countries. Air defense systems in the UAE engaged incoming drones and missiles. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense reported damage to an energy facility from intercepted projectiles. The conflict had metastasized far beyond Iran's borders. Internationally, the pressure on Washington was significant and growing. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned explicitly that attacks on civilian infrastructure violate international law. France's foreign minister called such attacks barred by the rules of war and warned they would trigger a new phase of escalation. The United Kingdom informed the United States it would not allow its military bases to be used for operations targeting civilian infrastructure, a quiet but significant rupture between the 2 closest allies in the Western world. Human rights expert Kenneth Roth, former executive director of Human Rights Watch, told NBC News that Trump was openly threatening collective punishment, targeting not the Iranian military but the Iranian people, a violation of the 4th Geneva Convention. Several Democratic senators called Trump's post completely unstable and unhinged. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, once one of the most loyal voices in Trump's political coalition, called for his removal under the 25th Amendment. Yet within all of this, diplomacy had not entirely ceased. An Iranian official confirmed that mediators from Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey were racing against time to find a compromise before the 8 p.m. deadline. Iran had submitted a 10-point counter-proposal in response to the American administration's 15-point peace framework. The Iranian proposal included a guarantee against future attacks, an end to Israeli strikes on Hezbollah and Lebanon, removal of sanctions, and, as the price of reopening the strait, a proposed $2 million transit fee for every commercial ship passing through. Trump called Iran's proposals a significant step and said he believed the regime was negotiating in good faith. He left a door open, however narrowly, writing that maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking in Budapest, where he had traveled to support Viktor Orban's re-election bid, confirmed the 8 p.m. deadline was real, while acknowledging that something concrete could change it. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian took to social media with words that carried the weight of a man who understood he was governing a country on the edge of catastrophe. More than 14 million brave Iranians have so far declared their readiness to sacrifice their lives to defend Iran, he wrote. I too have been, am, and will be sacrificing my life for Iran. And on the streets of Tehran, ordinary Iranians were forming human chains around power plants at the call of their officials, men and women and children standing between the turbines and the bombs in the oldest and most vulnerable form of civilian resistance. A young teacher in the capital, speaking anonymously to the Associated Press, put it plainly, if we don't have the internet, and if we don't have electricity, water, and gas, we're really going back to the Stone Age, as Trump said. That is the reality behind the rhetoric. A nation of 85 million people, heirs to one of the oldest and most sophisticated civilizations in human history, the Persian Empire that gave the world Cyrus the Great, the concept of human rights inscribed on the Cyrus cylinder, mathematics, poetry, and millennia of art and architecture, facing a deadline set by a single man in Washington. A civilization that predates the United States by more than 2,000 years, being told it might not survive the night. History does not often compress itself into a single evening, but on April 7, 2026, as the clock moved toward 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the world was watching one of those rare and terrible moments when the decisions made in a matter of hours would shape the trajectory of nations, economies, and human lives for decades to come. Whether the diplomats racing against Trump's deadline would find the words to stop what was coming, or whether the bombers would take off as threatened, that answer was still hours away. But the question itself had already changed the world, and the words that framed it, brutal, unprecedented, and impossible to walk back, had been written in plain sight on a social media platform by the most powerful man on earth. A whole civilization will die tonight.